Okay, I'm gonna do this as fast as I can, and don't think it's going to be fast, but I'm gonna do it as fast as I can because I've been recording a whole bunch of videos of puppies and I have no idea how much space I have left on this phone, and I would hate for it to cut off right in the middle. Okay, I'm gonna try to unpack a whole lot of thoughts that I've had, thoughts and feelings over the last week or so. In the process of this, I'm going to briefly characterize some comments that I've had from some folks, and hopefully at the conclusion of this I will have been able to communicate a little bit more of what's going on in my mind and heart, and I think that those things will be useful to you. One topic I'll start with, which I've been wanting to make a video about for a long time here, is the idea of what effects modern technology have as far as the consequences of the end times goes. So a lot could be said about this and everything else, frankly, but trying to make this as brief as possible, I want you to understand that truth is sequential and it's hierarchical. So every idea, every perception of reality has a higher resolution, higher accuracy, greater coverage version of itself out there somewhere. And no matter what you think about how things are, there's a better estimate of that out there somewhere. So we can just leave it to the realm of possibility rather than make the case that there is someone out there who already thinks that. So because truth, the nature of truth is hierarchical, what happens is if you're trying to help guide someone along the path to greater truth, and because it's sequential, it's not just hierarchical, it's line upon line. It's like rungs in a ladder. There's only so much you can skip at a time, and then you have to handle what's right in front of you. Wise teachers through the ages have adopted a signal and response way of teaching. And so a wise teacher will perceive a situation, will identify what they want their pupil to think and do, and how they want them to change as a result of what they're going to teach. And then they teach, and then they wait to observe the response. And so the wisest teacher of all, Jesus Christ, did this in creating the heavens and the earth. So it's a pretty serious process. It's got a lot of mileage on the odometer. It's the best way to do this sort of thing. So historically, when people were geographically confined, you had access basically to people who were around you. You could travel, and sometimes people traveled as preachers, but even then, for the most part, you had a very narrow window of what you had access to beyond what you already knew. So if you're face to face with a person, you can do this sounding and response business, this pattern of teaching and then evaluating, teaching, evaluating, and you never give the next piece until you can see that the previous piece has been perceived, received, and valued. And that's how you progress line upon line with this. Well, in the modern world, we have, I would argue, far less face-to-face influence compared to any previous generation. But even if that's up for dispute, I think one thing that's clearer is that we have unprecedented ability to reach So someone can watch this video in the desert in South Africa 5 minutes after I upload it, and someone probably will. But that's not all positive. And so it turns out that there is opposition in all things. There are consequences in all things. And there are a whole lot of consequences that attend the fact that we live in a world with unprecedented access to each other. So one gospel principle that affects this is the idea that we are responsible, we're held accountable for what we have access to. Not what we recognize, not what we notice, not what we receive, but what we have access to. Now, that doesn't mean that accountability is the same across all those conditions, but access equals accountability. That's the baseline, that's where it begins. God does not hold people accountable who don't have access. But once you have access, you enter the accountability hierarchy. So what I mean by that is you could go to the extreme and say, describe the consequences of going against a belief that you have every reason to believe is true and that you have lived for a long time, you've accumulated all this knowledge about. That's the extreme of that. But the entrance point is just access. So with technology, what we do is we squish down the cost of access, we explode the reach of access, and because of that, we explode the consequences, the accountability of people for information that's out there. So that should give you pause. But there are some barriers with this. One is that there's signal to noise. So anytime you increase a signal, and it doesn't matter what domain we're talking about, this is a universal law. You increase signal, you will get more noise at that signal. So even if there's not a lot of noise just all around, when you have a signal, you'll get noise commensurate with the intensity of that signal. So this is the source of phrases like where there's smoke, there's fire, which is usually used with a negative connotation, but positive connotation, if people are shooting at you, you're probably over the target. So wheat and chaff co-occur. You don't get chaff in random places that don't have wheat, right? And so on. So the more signal, true signal you have, the more counterfeits you have. You know, counterfeits are interesting because they require a real thing. And so when you get a counterfeit, you can, by definition, there has to be a real thing. If there's a false Messiah, that can only be true if there is also a true Messiah, right? And this is a great example of weaving this together, because when Jesus came, he came at a time when there were a whole bunch of false messiahs popping up, before, during, and after, right? So it's not wise to see counterfeits and say, therefore, this sort of thing always implies that it's false. And that's a logical fallacy a lot of people fall into. Okay, so with technology, there's a lot of false signals. And if you hop on YouTube, some massive percent of everything on there is not worth watching. And then whatever's left, it's going to be an enormous range of value in what those videos can give you. So that makes it very challenging because, like I said, the accountability is based on access. And I'm sure that in the calculus, the divine calculus, there's a little bit of mercy given, because if there are 9 billion videos, how are you going to narrow that down to the ones you have time to watch? Of course, there are tools for systematically assessing value ahead of time and dialing in, doubling down on what is obviously valuable and so on. But I digress. So one of the costs of such inexpensive information is that we tend to devalue what actually has value, even when we can see it actually has value. And this is a big problem, because in a sense, you could characterize the gospel as the discovery of what has greater value. And in some ways, that is finding new ideas. In a lot of other ways, it's coming to this deep, visceral acceptance isn't the right word, but it's coming to value in a very deep way what is valuable and what you may have known about or been exposed to, but you really just didn't care before. And so the end times is, talking about it, it's kind of like talking about the purpose of life. It's so rich that it's silly to say the purpose of life is, right? So what I like to say is one way you could look at the purpose of life, or a portion of the purpose of life is, or one facet of the purpose of life. You could say all those sorts of phrases about the end times, but two ideas in that are: one, the end times is a radical revelation of new information. And I'm not really going to talk much about that right now. Directly. Indirectly, I guess that's exactly what I'm going to do. The other facet I wanted to highlight is that the end times is a radical revelation of value. So those are things you can ponder on and get as far as you want with them. So, starting with the revelation of value, I've made many materials that discuss changes. And what happens is these changes roll out, and they've already started. They'll continue. I could tell you a lot about exactly how they're going to happen, but not today. But as they continue to roll out, what's going to happen is that what you value and how much you value it will change. And it'll change again and again. And over time, if you're on the right path, you're going to see a gradient. It's going to be a path that coalesces over time and has a really clear trajectory. And the more you notice that and the quicker you do, the better you can develop an expectation of where you're going. And that can help you accelerate in your movement in that direction, because it's going to keep going. It's going to go until there's no more left. It's going to be poured out completely. And there's a lot that could be said about that. Okay, so in correspondence over the last, say, 2 weeks, several people have said several things, and I'm just going to kind of extract and generalize and compress this. But one of the thoughts was someone, I don't know if you can hear that, somebody just turned on the vacuum cleaner. Started reading this book, Glory of God is Intelligence, and it surprised me because it's a guy that I've corresponded with for several years. And don't take this the wrong way, guy whose name I won't mention. I'm not criticizing you in any way. But I was kind of surprised he hadn't read this. And I guess to flip it as a compliment, we had a richness of discussion that made me presume that these were ideas he had already thought about. So anyway, this book, so when I go back and I flip through my books, which I try really hard not to do, because, well, there's a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is I'd like to have kind of a fresher perspective on, I don't want to just rehash old ideas. And in doing this, a lot of times I get a lot more depth or breadth in these ideas as I'm writing new books. But I try not to cover the same tracks twice ever, because I just don't have time. There's so much new information to talk about that I can't justify going back. Or at least it's a high bar. So, but I ended up going to the bookshelf because I wanted to make sure that one of the problems I have is I can't accurately separate what I have said before and how much I've said, because there's this billowing storm all the time in here for years and years and years, and I don't know where I left off in the last book where I talked about this idea. So at some point I do have to open the old books and do a Venn diagram and dial in what I'm talking about, and then I have to calculate exactly how much I want to rehash, because I don't want to say go read this book that's 300 pages before you keep reading this other one. Anyway, so I flipped back on this because I wanted to look up exactly what I had said about beliefs. And these are ideas I've spent a lot of time developing since then. So I was flipping through this, and the point is that I'm always shocked going back in time and looking at my old books, because the structure is very clear. It's like this, and the book is here. And what it is, it's a Cliff Notes version of everything that God has taught me since. So in other words, my spiritual mental life has been a zoom in on this very big picture. And when you zoom in, you know, if you have a fixed size monitor or something, it's you can only look at so much. But that's not what this is like. It just keeps getting bigger. But it gets higher resolution, and then I see all these connections that I didn't understand before, and I understand things a lot deeper than I did before. But sometimes there's slight shifts in how I understand things, but for the most part, it's just more and better. So it made me really sad that he hadn't read this book, and I think a lot of people haven't read it, and it's pretty crazy because of how much is in here. It's very, very valuable stuff. And how do I quantify that right now? Well, this is about 300 pages. And like I said, I think if you pulled this apart, it'd be this grid. And the grid doesn't really change. But my current understanding of this is I think I would need at least 3,000 pages to tell you everything I know about this stuff now. But here it is, in a weird way. God has seen fit to give it in like the Cliff's Notes version first, and then the higher resolution version later. So this is available, and you can read it right now. And a lot of people haven't. And that's really sad, or you can listen to it. Okay, so I'm going to try to not meander too far with these thoughts, but when it comes to what is coming, the information to render those experiences as something that's going to help you is not in the world right now. But what is in the world right now would yield a much greater experience than what you have. So, there are two important points to make here. One is, because truth is successive and incremental, hierarchical, however you want to say it, it's all of those things. If you don't understand and do a certain amount now, you will be especially ill-equipped for what is to come later. Part of that lack of readiness is going to be in your ability to perceive, receive, and value those things as they're revealed. So if you're taking lightly or treating as a thing of naught what is exceedingly valuable and available right now, I guarantee you that you will do the same with what is more valuable and what is yet to come. That probably contradicts your understanding of how these things work, but I promise you it is this way. I think we like to think that if something is very valuable, it will also be very obvious. In truth, the most valuable things tend to be the least obvious ones. And you can make an argument that this is one significant reason the gospel exists in the first place, or that any of us are here in the first place. It's that things of great value do not seem valuable in the eyes of the natural man. And a lot of you will say, well, yeah, but I'm not a natural man or a natural woman because I believe in God. Well, for the sake of argument, let's please presume that that's not the case for now. But I will make a case in a book to come that shows you that that's not the case. Maybe for now, this book might be enough to do that, which is a book that argues that we actually are supposed to do what we believe God would do in our place, and we're actually supposed to not do the things that we can't imagine him doing in our place. That was another correspondence I had this week where someone wrote me and they said, I must be getting something wrong because I'm reading this book and it just seems like it's an awful lot to try to do. And I said, no, you're getting it. That's exactly the point. It's not it's simple, but it's not an easy thing to do. It actually takes all of your heart, might, mind, and strength, just like the scriptures say. Anyway, that was an interesting conversation. Okay, so I want to make a case that these 4 books, if you haven't read them, you really need to read them. And reading them isn't enough. As if that weren't enough to ask you, you actually have to do what's in them. So, this one is about actually forsaking your sins, actually living up to how you imagine God to be. It's very small, and most of it is just quotes from the scriptures. I'd say at least half of the words in this book are just quotes from the scriptures. This one, I also flipped through this week. Again, I was making sure I didn't already say something that I wanted to say. And I'll tell you, it's disheartening to do this. That's another reason I try not to look through them too often. Usually I'll just ask one of my kids who's read the book, hey, did I ever talk about this? And they're like, yeah, you talk about this, and it's this. And I say, okay, good. The reason it's disheartening is because there is so much value in this already that people need and they don't have. But what this book is about is it's about faith. It's about how to orient your life such that you can discover the principles that lead to what you want. So you'd think that that'd be exciting for folks, but that's a very important book. And both of those books are vastly expanded on in books to come. But if you don't get it, you're not going to get it. This one, Men Are That They Might Have Joy. The cover's different. This is an old version. I kind of did an autumn spice cover. It's got some yellow trees on it for the new one. But this book is a preliminary understanding of the challenge of sorrow and pain in this life and why that's actually a pathway to greater joy. This book means a lot to me, and there are the things that I am most excited to tell you about come after this book. And that book is mostly done, but the one I'm referencing is not published yet. But it's going to be a while because there are prerequisite books that need to come out first. And then I already spoke about this one. Now, if statistics bear out here, half of you have already stopped watching. which I'm going to make a comment about. I'll fold it into what I'm going to say right now, which is, if we were talking face to face and you had not read these books, and I would ask you, have you read these books? If you said no, I would say nothing else to you. Not one word. So one benefit that technology affords us is the ability, it's like an all-access pass to information. That comes with consequences, but it comes with benefits. And the question is, are you using those? Because if we didn't have this, you wouldn't have hundreds of videos to give you evidence that I know something that's valuable to you, that I've been through things that you have not been through, that the Lord has blessed me with things that you seek and do not have yet. But you have hundreds of videos that hit you, that pepper you with things that you did not know before, that extend what you knew, that give you new things that are valuable. What are you doing as a result of that? Because if you haven't read these books, you've missed the boat. The good news is there's time to catch up to the boat, but those consequences are hanging like a sword over you. And zooming out from me and from you, they're hanging like a sword over the world, because God has dumped, not just through these books, throughout history, God has dumped light and truth on this world. It's everywhere. It's like if you're familiar with the old game Zelda, the old school one, the Nintendo, where you had to blow out the cartridge every time you played it. There are pieces of his character all over the place because he's embedded in and through all things. But if you just get lazy about it and you don't value that and you just take it for granted, you can't scoop them up and put them together into something bigger and better. So it's out there, and the question is, what are you doing about it? I promise you that there is a time quickly approaching where this will not exist. There will be the silencing of more and more people that are teaching truth online. It will be harder and harder to get things like this. And things will revert back to the old way, where all you have access to are the people that you can physically go talk with. And you won't be able to hop on a plane or even to get in a car and drive. In that day, you're going to wish you did more today. So I encourage you to think about that. Getting back to this idea of, watching 10 minutes of a 30-minute video, I get the need to screen information and focus on the things that are most valuable. And I also quite plainly understand that the things in these books and videos are, I won't say they're not for everybody, because they are for everybody, but very few people will find anything near the true value of what's embedded in them. However, I do think that it's important to warn you to exercise caution in the diligence and the heed that you exercise in these things, and especially in the lack thereof. If you have a light attitude towards things like this, and it's just scrolling through your feed or whatever, that is not in line with the value that's in these materials that I'm producing. I'm not going to say you'd be better off not watching it at all, because you're going to be held accountable either way. What I'm saying is, I guarantee you cannot extract the value out of it by doing it that way. And that as these changes keep rolling forward, you're going to come to a point where it becomes evident to you that you missed out on some things that you were meant to learn and do a lot sooner. And in that day, you might not have access to this. So there will be a day where you don't have access to this. What I'm saying is, you may or may not realize the value of what you wasted while there's still time to do something about it. It's no different than me saying for years to people, you should think about where you live. You should think about how the value of where you live is going to change under these conditions, because these things are going to happen. And then they did happen. And now, pretty much everyone I talk to is trapped wherever the heck they live, because the cost of living has gone through the roof. There just isn't much mobility, and there's nowhere you can go in a way that's convenient anymore. Because no matter where you move, you're going to lose some square footage on the house in the real estate deal. You might lose a whole lot. There aren't really so many convenient places to work anymore. Everything's constricting. And so this is another one of those, and you're going to see these things play out. So, giving you enough food for thought. I got to get to work. I hope that you take these things seriously and you get into these books if you haven't. And if you have, I hope that you're making lists of things that the Spirit speaks to you as you're reading and thinking about this, and that you make those changes, because it's important. God is working a work where He's pulling up anyone who will listen to a higher level. I don't mean a higher level of consciousness, whatever New Agey kind of thing. I'm saying He's offering better beliefs that are more powerful in helping people get what is valuable, keep what is valuable, and become more like Him. And that's all in the face of a tide of increased tribulation, challenges, information. And so it's time. It's late in the game. And there really just aren't a lot of people taking this seriously. Just to be clear, and I'll wrap up with this, I'm not saying any of this because I care one lick about how many books I sell. I don't even look at that. I don't care. I don't make any money off my books. The only reason I care is I like the idea of people getting this information. I'm not saying this for clicks. It's real easy to get clicks, trust me. I mean, all I'd have to do is show some cleavage or say some clickbaity thing about the Lord gave me this vision about whatever. It's real easy to get people to watch videos. I don't make these to make them appealing to people. I make them so that they're useful to people. So, yep, I think that's about all I have to say. So get serious. The time is short. And look, even if you don't find value in the things that I say or write, great. Go find what has value to you and double down on it. Get in there and extract all the value you can. Get into the scriptures. Get into prayer. Get into whatever the heck brings value into your life and double down on that. Because the time is short. Things are changing. They're going in a certain direction, and it's really important to understand where it's going, why, and what you should do about it.